Oi, oi, it's your boy, the Jared Cannonier of slapping your mum's rear, Jack Slack. It's the Jack Slack podcast. We're coming at you on Monday, the 23rd of August, and we got some fights to chat about. I'm coming at you, if you can't tell the difference, I'm coming at you through a new Rode PodMic and on a Rodecaster Pro interface with all kinds of fancy shit built in, so hopefully sounding a bit better than I used to. Let me know. And I've also got buttons that let me do shit like this. Didn't have time to set up my MMA sound clips, but I've got a few selected that I'm going to have. Some of them might be quite deep cuts. I did want to get the incredibly real-ass dude who called into the Kayla Harrison pre-fight press conference, or rather like Skype conference call, that's what they used to call it, and said, yeah, I've got a question for Gina, or whatever her opponent's name was. You pretty, but you also pretty good at fighting. And it's the worst thing. I mean, it's pretty bad. It's pretty bad. You should go and watch it. Kayla Harrison lays into this lad. But equally, who the fuck is covering PFL? I mean, the man who deserves the $1 million is not... Well, I mean, Kelleher is obviously not a man, but the person who deserves the $1 million is the guy who managed to get the MMA media to talk about women's lightweight. Like, I understand that Kayla Harrison's a legitimate talent. I watched her in the judo. I was intrigued by her MMA career, but no, stop acting like it's like a real accomplishment to beat women who aren't there in a division that doesn't exist. The real-ass dude's real crime was accusing that woman of being pretty good at fighting. But I will have that clipped soon. So look forward to more of you pretty, but you also a pretty good fighter. Also going to run through the classics. I Want to Fuck Chuck. I've watched a lot of DVDs. I Back. All the classics. I mean, that really quite dates the era that I was memeing in MMA. It's like 2005. But... yeah. If you've got any more, tell me about them. He's still my boy. There's so many. I want them all. But anyway, aside from my new toys, which I've been having far too much fun with, let's talk about these fights. First up, Jared Cannonier versus Kelvin Gastelum. I just got done watching it, and I watched all the other fights first, which was a terrible decision, because you're always then tired when you get to the main event, and the main event's the one you want to be alert for. I normally watch these the next day and then go back backwards from the main event, or rather main event, things that I was looking forward to, finishes, rest of the fights. That's the way I do it, and that's why some fights do not make the cut to be talked about. But I did watch all of them this week, so yeah, people were just getting bodied left, right, and centre on the prelims this time around. But the main event, Jared Cannonier versus Kelvin Gastelum. Talked about this in the pre-fight, put it up on the YouTube. What we're going to do now is the Thursday podcast is going to be the Boycast. That's a longer podcast for the boys on Patreon. But I'm also going to put out, the most important fight of the week on the YouTube and the feed as normal. So I talked about it I think I put it up on the YouTube. Might not have put it up on the podcast feed. Shit. Just remembered that task. But we did discuss it at some length. And yes, I was honest. Like, some of this played out as I expected. Other bits really didn't. I did not expect Jared Cannonier to turn up in such terrific condition. And, we said, the question is still there, or was still there. He stopped he stopped some takedowns from some good wrestlers, but he did it for like a round and a half and then finished them. The question was always, can you do that further into the fight, especially with that big cut down to middleweight? I mean, he basically had to transform his life and lose a load of weight normally. And then also has the cut down to middleweight. He's not a heavyweight making like a water cut down to middleweight. And I will say that was one of the things that stood out, actually. The size difference between the two of them, genuinely not that big for a former welterweight versus a former heavyweight. But yes, the man looked great, kept pace through the whole fight. He did get put very briefly on the mat in the final round, but otherwise untouchable in the takedown defense. And Gastelum went to more takedowns as we expected and didn't have a lot of success. But what you saw a lot in this one, I mean, Gastelum, the thing that he does is the 1-2 bursting in from southpaw. Sometimes he loops the left hand around and catches people in an exchange, but generally it's the left hand. His right hand is a bit of an afterthought or just a jab to open the door. what you saw from Cannonier was like a massive range of things that he was doing. Well, not massive, but a range of things that he was doing against Kelvin Gastelum's darting in straight with the left hand. Yeah, he just looked really well practiced. He looked like his coaches had really taken Kelvin Gastelum apart and prepared him perfectly. And he applied it perfectly in the moment. Right from the opening round, Kelvin Gastelum tries to put his right foot down the outside of Cannonier's left foot and slide down with the 1-2. And immediately, Cannonier goes back and to his right. We call it spiraling out sometimes. You know, when you're a southpaw against an orthodox, you do it back and to the left. And I always go back and to the left. And now I will get the sound clip on my sound clip board. But if you're the orthodox fighter and it's the southpaw coming in on you, you go back and to the right and you circle round that way and you try and draw out their left-handed. You go back over the top when they fall short. And he did. He immediately rushed into the fence, threw a head kick as well. And it was really good. And then he was using nice pivots off sometimes too. He'd slip to the outside of Gastelum's lead shoulder and hit with the left hook as he pivoted out. And then he did more work where he was switching to southpaw himself and doing really good work from there. Dropped Gastelum with a leaping right hook from southpaw. Something that Gastelum doesn't have to deal with a lot of anyway. You know, the last southpaw he fought was probably, going from memory, but Till, I think. And Till is, all left hand. Then he was doing lots of kicking. We said, would Cannonier be confident kicking against someone who's actively trying to take him down? And he looked very confident. He was using lots of low kicks. Did a lovely low kick into middle kick off the other leg. Very American kickboxing to throw one kick and then the other. But, if you've got the guy's balance broken, great idea. Threw the odd teep to the belly, but mainly just used the knee raise feint to get in, which we always love. Pick your knee up and just hop in behind it, basically. And the other guy will crunch up in a ball or go up on one leg or something, and then you come in and hit him afterwards. And we'll talk about that with Czech Congo later too. But generally, just really had his number. Knew when to leave, knew when to stand and bang, knew when to hold him and when to fold him. So like a lot of the time he'd be gliding out and circling away from Gastelum's charges and then trying to come back over the top. But then sometimes he'd stand his ground and hit him. So there was one where Gastelum basically, he started throwing like a 3-punch flurry, and the way that he was moving made it very clear that he was expecting Cannonier to give ground, but Cannonier hit him with an uppercut and just stood there, and he just collapsed onto the takedown attempt. But more evidence in the case of Kelvin Gastelum having an all-time great chin. This dude gets hit by everyone and just stands up immediately afterwards and is like, okay, let's keep going. I did like Kelvin Gastelum's use of the low kicks. I thought that was a great idea, and it looked like an even better idea because of the amount of movement that Cannonier was using. Not like bouncing around all over the place, but every time that Gastelum tried to close in on him, he used his feet to exit and measure out the perfect time to counter and the perfect time to exit, and cutting off on angles and circling out. But he was using his legs a lot to deal with the threat of Gastelum's speed, confronting his footwork rather than his hand speed. And when you're doing that, your feet are obviously occupied in a task, which means that you're not as ready to pick up your legs and check. So using the low kick was a good shout. And of course, if the guy does start picking up his legs to check, or you just kick his legs for free and they start getting bruised up, you're reducing his ability to use those movements that were giving you trouble earlier. So that was a good idea, and Gastelum's corner kept calling for it, but he didn't actually get to it enough. But what I really liked, like obviously Cannonier was also dealing with that, like he was using movement straight back, retracting the leg away, and he was using that and his circling off from Gastelum's flurries to change stances in that moment. So he'd flatten he'd bring his legs level and skip round, and then he'd just leave the other one in front. Very casually changing stances. If you make it a big deal, people notice and people start to hit you when you do it. So if you look at like Danny Jacobs, is it Danny Jacobs? Yeah, Danny Jacobs had a great fight against Gennady Golovkin when Gennady Golovkin was like at his best. And Jacobs put on a brilliant performance, and he was using both stances really effectively. And Golovkin just like at one point, it might have been like the 6th or 7th or 8th round or something like that. But at some point through, he just waited on Jacobs to go to southpaw again. He was like eating jabs in the face, just sort of waiting for him to switch to southpaw. The moment that Jacobs stepped to southpaw, he hit him with the right hand straight down the middle. Because that's, the straight right hand off the bat right hand lead, naked. Not so useful against an orthodox fighter, but the opening is there against a southpaw. And if you do it in the second that he's switching, he's expecting you to be behind. He might not have changed his mindset as to what he's looking for offensively and defensively yet if he's between switches. But if you do it in motion, if you change stances as you're circling out or retreating or whatever, and you just sort of stay with that leg in front, it's very easy to hide it from the opponent so that you've got time to work out what you're doing from that stance and they don't have time to work out that you're in that stance. A great example would be Max Holloway versus Cub Swanson. Every time he throws a punch or a kick or something like that, he circles out the side, and as Cub Swanson's pivoting to face him, pivoting around his lead foot, Max has already changed stances. So I thought, it was a close fight. People were talking about it like Cannonier just dominated it, but it was a close fight. I don't think it was a very strange call by Gastelum's corner to basically tell him that he was up and that Cannonier was going to come at him hell for leather. When the whole fight, Cannonier had been very patient, aggressive, but letting Gastelum come to him, kicking at him when he was standing back, never like charging Gastelum and trying to knock him out in one go. And then he did that for the 5th round too, and it was just a strange approach by Cordero and his corner. But then they came up with the weirdest game plan for Marvin Vettori against Israel Adesanya the second time. So yeah, a bit strange, but coaches are allowed to have misfires, and they, if you consider every coaching performance, you're doing like 5 per night, whereas the fighter is fighting once every 3 months. So you're probably going to get a lot more bad performances as a coach than as a fighter. I thought John Crouch in Cannonier's corner was on top form. I can't say enough how impressed I've been with Cannonier since moving to or training in Arizona. I think he still lives in Alaska, which could be part of why he's broke. But, I won't get into this too much. I tried to save going full Marat or Robespierre for the boy cast now, when we're talking about news. But Cannonier did get on the mic afterwards and say he was broke. And so someone said, I'm surprised DC didn't take him down and submit him, just stop him from saying it. But there's been a couple of weird stories like this come out this week, like Misha Tate saying that she lost 98% of the money that she earned. And she tried to say it was like through tax and expenses. And it did turn out that she's got some weird, like she's flying all over the place to train. And I think Cannonier is flying down to Arizona to train. But equally, don't let that distract you from the issue of fighter pay, which is very real. Jared Cannonier could well have spent his money like an absolute idiot, which is what everyone or certainly all the people with Bitcoin in their profile were saying on the Twitter threads about this. But, the overall issue is that the revenue split is embarrassing. To put it in like a quick bit of perspective, the UFC has a $1.5 billion deal with ESPN for 5 years to put on 30 cards a year. That comes down to roughly $10 million per card. If it were a 50-50 revenue split, the fighters on that card would get $5 million of that revenue between them. I would be very surprised if any of these cards breaks 1.5 million revenue going to the fighters. And more importantly than that, like that is one example that, ESPN, the ESPN deal is one source of revenue for the UFC. That's not even including the tickets that they sell for events. The fact that they also do pay-per-views on their own. They wouldn't still be doing the pay-per-views and stacking them with names if they were making less for them than they're making on the ESPN deal. Then you got the sponsors plastered all over everything, the ad reads, and so on and so forth. So there's a lot of money being splashed around in the UFC, as you could see from like Endeavor's report the other day. But the fighters are woefully underpaid. Even if Cannonier is making like $250,000 per fight, that's still quite small for a man who's headlined 2 of these ESPN cards and main carded on the Habib, the last Habib card, the huge Habib card. But do make fun of him for the crystals and the QAnon stuff. Anyway, let's. What's next for him? I suppose. I think probably you got to put together that Paulo Costa fight. Paulo Costa's been out for a while. This was supposed to be the Paulo Costa fight, which kind of sucks for Cannonier if you've had that fight lined up. You take the fight and then you haven't moved forward at all. but Gastelum is now like 1-5 in his last 6, I think. And again, always game, always in these fights, but you need to get some fucking wins. Co-main event was Marco Madsen versus Clay Guida, and I think I probably speak for all of us when I say I think we were pretty on the money in the pre-fight talking about this, because I said I'm very impressed by what Madsen can do. I just don't know how long he can do it for. If you watch the Austin Hubbard fight, he's incredible for the early going, and then in rounds 2 and 3, he's basically in survival mode. And that's against Austin Hubbard, who like has fun stuff that he does against wrestlers, but isn't a great, isn't great at wrestling in his own right. Clay Guida, pretty experienced wrestler and all-rounder, and Madsen basically couldn't get him off his feet. I mean, he tried like one half-assed takedown, jabbed for most of the rest of the time, got pretty lucky getting the decision, I felt. But one of the interesting things that I saw people talking about in the coming up to this fight is that everyone just wants to proclaim that freestyle wrestling, folk style wrestling, Greco-Roman wrestling is actually the best base for MMA, and probably not. I don't know. When Randy was about, everyone was about the Greco-Roman wrestling and how that's the best base for MMA. After Ben Askren and Khabib, everyone's like folk style or sambo or whatever. But the truth is, like, both have incredible value, but it's kind of like when you're talking about like point fighting or knockdown karate or something like that. They're very the rule sets have a load of like arbitrary things about them that make you very good at some stuff, but once you allow much more, you need all the skills. And that's not me saying like, oh no, wrestlers need to box. It's like, yes, he's a Greco-Roman prodigy, but if you spent the last 15 years or whatever pummeling for grips on an opponent who's going to stand chest to chest and try and pummel with you, or come in with his arms, with his elbows tight to his waist and trying to pummel from there, it's a bit different to going after someone who's going to try and stay away from you. And for that, you need level changes and things. So he did like sort of one half-assed level change in this. And this is not me saying like he can't do that either. I think that's one of the things that people really get in. Like, if you're an American wrestler, yeah, you will split off into Greco-Roman or freestyle. Is it freestyle's the other one? Yeah, Greco-Roman or freestyle. And become specialized. But all of them came up pretty much the same way early on. Like, dudes who go to Greco-Roman can shoot a double, and they can probably shoot a double better than most of like the jiu-jitsu players or grapplers who are still using double legs in competition. That was one of the big sort of knocks that I always had on Rousey. All her entrances to the clinch were like run in face first and throw the left hook, and it is part of what made her so easy to hit on the way back. She occasionally showed like a slight dip at the legs. I know that her knees weren't great from years of judo. I think the same is true of Kelleher Harrison. I think the same is true of like anyone who did any judo for any length of time. But you've got to be able to get in like that, change it up, go underneath. What I did like from Marco Madsen was that he was looking for the double collar tie a lot. It's interesting because back in Pride, when people were going for the double collar tie, or as we called it at the time, tie clinch, and then Joe Rogan called it the plum, and we all called it the plum because we don't all have that tie lineage. So we were just like, yeah, that's the plum. And then you go, oh, wait, no, the plum's actually just the clinch generally. Wish I trained at a gym where they used the tie words sometimes. But I mean, getting anal about that is like the tie equivalent of being a weeb. But yeah, the shoot box guys used to just reach out and take the double collar tie. They just grab people around the head. I mean, Verdum was doing it to top 10 heavyweights. I mean, he was doing it to the heavyweight world champion, Cain Velasquez. If you throw punches at people and try and grab them around the head, like, you can get it sometimes. The Muay Thai folks will be like, that would never work against a great Nak Muay, but there's a lot more going on in MMA, And if you grab the head with one hand or the other guy will probably grab back because he doesn't want you to have a double collar tie. He wants you probably to have a single collar tie, or ideally he wants a double collar tie or a clinch, or just to get the fuck out of there. But he doesn't want you having a double collar tie, so he'll wrestle back and you can work for other stuff from there. And you saw that he was using like 2-on-1s occasionally and doing some interesting stuff from there, but ultimately not achieving anything. If you want to get into all that stuff, actually, there's a great book which Victory Belt published years ago, and nobody fucking bought it because it was Matt Linland's book, Dirty Boxing, and it's not actually about dirty boxing. It's more a wrestling book with some really cool MMA stuff in. but it is probably one of the best wrestling for MMA books or wrestling for MMA resources you can get. You can literally watch him fight Rampage Jackson when Rampage was like the number 2 light heavyweight in the world, and Matt Lyndon was still a middleweight, and Lyndon's doing this stuff to Rampage. It's very cool. But yeah, Lyndon was great with like 2-on-1s and things, even in like an MMA context. And that book has a lot of that in. So yeah, that's why I'm mentioning that. Yeah, so mainly it was like Clay Guida throwing calf kicks and low kicks with his right leg, coming down with the left hook, occasionally cracking him with a good one. Marco Madsen trying to jab and continuously, like, I think it was Anik pointed this out, but he always does like he does a blue steel look off to his left. Oh, I've got a dynamic mic now, so you might be able to hear the difference between me doing that. But yeah, look off to his left, like, and pout, and then he'd throw the jab. It was very strange. But yeah, he's working with Eric Alberachin, who is my boy on Facebook, and he's a very good coach. But I think there's some work to be done there with Madsen, because this performance was not very impressive. And of course, lightweight, not short of people who are more athletic and explosive than Clay Guida. Not short of people who will actually knock you out if you let them hit you, like Clay Guida did. Gonna jump down the card now and then come back up for the fat lads. But the one I was looking forward to, Pantoja versus Royval. Man, Pantoja looks like a different person every time I see him. It's quite confusing, but he grew out some slick-ass hair for this fight. He looked very swarthy. And it was a good look for him, I'll be honest. But yeah, good, scrambly, fun fight. Pantoja looked good on the feet, actually, because, Royval, I mean, he has, like, ugly fights, but he's very dangerous on the feet. And I think Pantoja, I was probably expecting worse because he looked he looked good on the feet against Manel Cape, but it was a very cautious fight. He was very clearly concerned about getting blasted. And in this one, he opened up a bit more and looked very competent. Then they hit the ground, and of course, it was all the grappling that you expect. Brandon Royval giving up his back, or almost giving up his back, rolling over the top and landing in like a sort of backsliding half guard pass. Something that Joey B used to do a lot. Like he'd give up his back, the guy would put one hook in maybe, and he'd roll across the top and end up sort of like in half guard, backsliding out of it, like Marcelo Garcia's favorite pass. But yeah, they got into like a few scrambles, and then Royval managed to get on the legs in a very unusual way. He managed to get on the legs, not isolating one leg, but instead having his legs tight around both his opponent's legs, both Pantoja's legs, which you will very occasionally see. Frank Shamrock did it to, I think it was Jeremy Horn, he knee-barred, or maybe it was John Lober the second time, but it was in the UFC. He ended up like grabbing both the guy's feet as the guy got a back body lock, and he sat in basically what was like a backwards mount, locked his legs around both of the guy's legs, and then extended one leg in a knee bar, which I know some guys like Josh Barnett really like. Josh Barnett did it from north-south against Haihon Gracie. I think that's his name. But that was a really sad one, because that was he was booked to have a match against Cyborg Abreu, who I believe at the time was the ADCC champion. And Barnett had just submitted Dean Lister, being the first person to do it in like 15 years or whatever. And it was really exciting. Like, that was a really interesting time for grappling. But this shows you how far the world has come in grappling since Meta Morris. Because Meta Morris was the first sort of thing doing super fights, no gi, on a big scale. And Cyborg basically said he couldn't do the match because he couldn't find training partners for no gi. Like, because Brazil does it all in seasons, based on when the tournaments are. And, now that's unthinkable. Everyone's doing no-gi stuff every weekend. Flow Grappling's got a tournament, Flow Grappling's got a card of super fights on, like, every other week. Which is great. I'm so glad, because no-gi is a much more interesting sport than gi. And I think it's probably got a much better crossover with MMA. Not that I don't like gi, I'm just saying, it's certainly better as a spectator. But yeah, again, so Cyborg Abreu dropped out. Josh Barnett took on Haihon Gracie because, like, he was the organizer's brother, and he sort of was like, yeah, I'll save your card. And Josh Barnett goes to north-south on him and then jumps up into, like, a reverse mount, wrapping his legs around both of Haihon's legs, and toe holds him on one of his feet, which was very cool. But back to this fight, Royval has both legs, and he's sort of attacking, like, a clover leaf, which is when you've got one leg crossed over the other, and you're basically cranking the shin into the back of into the Achilles of the other leg. There isn't a heel hook there. It looks a little bit like the inverted heel hook when you're looking at it, but it ain't there. But, it's one of those things like when you're watching it, you go, yeah, there's nothing there. It's like Bas Rutten used to watch people get an Achilles locked, and he'd go, it's just pain. You can fight through that. And if you like people who are really good at the Achilles lock, it is actually a joint lock. Like it will blow out your the top of your ankle. But most people just get like the calf and they grind their wrist into your Achilles and they hope it hurts, and it does hurt. But you can sit there going like, there's nothing there. But if you're in there and it does feel like something's going to blow out, then you've got to tap. And just the other week, actually, Kenan Duarte, who's one of the top heavyweight guys in grappling, he took on Matthias Deniz. Matthias Deniz, a very experienced guy, got him in a cloverleaf, made him tap. So I'm never going to judge someone for tapping to a cloverleaf, but it seems kind of unlikely you're going to get a good tap there in a fight for money. And as Dana White had already announced, it was for a title shot, in a fight for a title shot. If nothing's actually going to blow out, the guy's not going to tap. And then he somehow worked his way into the saddle, which is a leg entanglement. And he tried to, this is Royval, tried to come up on a pass, which Gordon Ryan does a lot. He'll go from the saddle, stand up, jump over, start knee cutting. But he somehow lost it. Pantoja came up on the inside. The striking was quite interesting because we talked about how Royval really does overcommit, stepping in on the kicks and gets clattered on the return a lot of the time. It's very interesting because, like, if you're a southpaw, and he's fighting both ways, but when he's southpaw, if you're southpaw against an orthodox opponent, typically, because of the way their body's facing, kicks and knees on the open side is your go-to. You'll land knees with your left leg a lot easier than you will with your right leg if they're orthodox. And that's true if you're orthodox and they're orthodox as well. Like, you will land your left knee easier than your right knee. But he goes southpaw and then tries to step up into a right knee. And sometimes it really catches guys by surprise. Sometimes he goes to the face with it because some of the guys he's fighting are so much shorter than him. It was interesting watching that. But yeah, he drove at an absolutely frantic pace. Then he tried to get Pantoja down as Pantoja was sort of puffing. Pantoja fought his way up. Royval tried to hit him along the fence and really overcommitted this time. Like, he threw a left straight and it looked like he was going to try and turn through or something, but he just basically gave his back up to Pantoja, who, as we've already said, is a guy who will constantly look to duck under and take your back. It's like him, Ricardo Ramos, Jussier Formiga. They want you to punch so that they can get on your back. They'll just duck into your armpit and then stand up so that their ear's on your back. And that's what happened. And he got his back, dead to rights, caught him in I think he body triangled it, but he got a rear naked choke and finished him, which is really interesting because Royval's so good at scrambling from those sort of positions and perhaps got a bit overconfident because of it. Bit sad for the Royval Boyvils like me, a name I've just invented and now wish I hadn't. But Pantoja, on a good little run. It does make it kind of awkward because when they said, like, the winner of this gets title fight, I went, yes. And then someone pointed out, what about Askar Askarov, who literally just beat Pantoja? So yeah, that's kind of awkward. But, I don't want to say it, but nobody cares about flyweight outside of you and me, so they'll do whatever. Fuck it, let Cody Garbrandt have a shot. So what else was good? Parker Porter versus Chase Sherman was a very heavyweight fight. Very heavyweight. Really, really slow. But, like, frantic pace for them. They're moving like they're covered in treacle. But they're, like, breathing like, oh my god, every second of this fight's a sprint. Chase Sherman trying to low kick lot or trying to calf kick lots. Parker Porter, I've been writing Advanced Striking 2.0 Aldo this week, and I've been doing some diagrams of the checks that he used against both Pedro Munoz and Renato Moicano. One of them we've talked about last week, but he picks his foot up right to the back of his other knee so that they kick basically under where his leg was. They miss entirely. And you saw Pedro Munoz do that a lot. But the other one he does is that he keeps his foot on the ground, which is, again, the other counter. If you want to actually punish a calf kick, keep your foot on the ground. But it's very tricky to turn your foot out so that your shin's pointing into the kick without, like, coming up on the ball of your foot and then you're losing traction on the ground. So when the guy kicks you, your leg just comes out of the way. You'll watch... I mean, you've probably seen tons of this now, but, like, guys trying to stand their ground and turn their shin out into the calf kick and getting knocked off balance. And the way that Aldo does it is that he... basically, on his right foot, he pulls himself back and turns his hips so that he's facing off to his left, like his stance is facing slightly to the left of the opponent. He's not just trying to turn that shin out on its own. He turns his whole body. And Parker Porter was doing a good job of just turning his shin out because he's a very heavy lad. And like he, even on the ball of his foot, there was still quite a lot of weight on his foot. But the commentators were mad about this calf kick. Like it got checked for twice for every one time it landed. And they're still going like, oh, Parker Porter's leg, it's mangled. It's going to give out any second. Meanwhile, Parker Porter's slapping him upside the head with punches constantly. Very messy fight, but good fun. And Parker Porter fought John Jones in his second MMA fight. How funny is that? But I like, unironically, quite like Parker Porter. And I like him even more ironically. And to be honest, I'm all right with Chase Sherman. He's pretty fun too. But I watched some bare knuckle FC this weekend. I mean, I might as well just jump into that here and we'll come back to the rest of this card. But I watched some bare knuckle FC this weekend. Barnett versus Bedford. And I've seen Bedford fight before. Just to see how like bare knuckle FC is going along. And it was kind of disappointing, because like it has its chance to be its own sport. They used like big MMA names to bring people in, and then they could be using like young boxers who specifically want to try and make money in bare knuckle. There are tons of good boxers out there who aren't going to get the attention in boxing. They haven't been chosen. There are loads of guys like that who just don't get the promoter and the chance. They could be getting guys like that in to learn to fight bare knuckle specifically. But instead, if you look at their list of champions, this will tell you how much they actually care about making their own sport. Chase Sherman, Joey Beltran, Hector Lombard, Thiago Alves, Luis Palomino. I mean, Hector Lombard won it in a fight against Joe Riggs. Luis Palomino won it against Isaac Valley Flag. It's just all MMA fighters. The one place that isn't is this lightweight championship where Johnny Bedford is an MMA fighter, but not like an MMA name. He's someone who's come over from MMA. So yeah, I mean, it's interesting. Like the fight was weird. I expected people to gravitate more to the jab in BKFC, but this might have been a bad example because it was a Southpaw versus Orthodox matchup, but the guys were not jabbing much at all. They're just looking for big swings. I suppose that's partly because it's not bare knuckle. Bare knuckle, you're allowed to tape your hands. You're allowed to wrap your hands so that it is completely solid at the wrist. But lots of looking for big swings and knockouts. I mean, I did like the collar tie use, which I'd seen Bedford fight before, and he does that a lot. Grab behind the head with one hand and hit the face. But yeah, I mean, dudes should be focusing more on that jab because you're going to cause cuts quickly. You're going to swell up the eyes, and of course, without gloves, your hands are a lot quicker. You can move them around. It's the hand, not the body, throwing the punch. And that is something that I have noticed in bare knuckle FC, well, in bare knuckle boxing generally. If you watch like Jimmy Sweeney, Bedford did it here too, but there's a lot of hand waving because guys can move their hands a lot quicker. Literal hand speed. It's not, you're not being weighed down by 8 ounces of leather on each hand. So yeah, sort of recommend BKFC. I think it was BKFC 20. Well, I mean, yeah, it was all right. Elsewhere on this UFC card, Trevin Jones versus Said Yakub Khakrimanov was shit. Absolute shit. They just leaned on each other for 14 minutes and then he caught the guillotine. So, I mean, it was a highlight reel submission on the end of just a dreadful match. It was Mir versus Krokop. Vince Pichel versus Austin Hubbard. My boy Austin Hubbard, I was like, finally not fighting a super elite grappler. And then Vince Pichel comes out and has hands. I just found out it's Vince Pichel. Like, why is there no E on the end? I thought it was Vink. I thought he was like, yeah, Vink Pichel. But yeah, apparently like his first camp with a proper camp, and he's now 38 years old. Grew out a moustache, looks like Don Fry. I thought he looked decent. I mean, I didn't see it as so one-sided as a lot of people seemed to. 30-27 was just bizarre scorecard. But once he started landing, he was landing well. It was very weird because people were going, wow, Vince Pichel's boxing. And I'm looking at it and he's got his hands like down by his waist swinging. He's got leaning over, swinging wide, but he's landing, and that's the important part. He was throwing this uppercut, like he'd go from orthodox, he'd throw his right uppercut, but he'd throw it like a straight. So it's extending at the elbow. It's not being like a lot of uppercuts. If you do a nice uppercut from in close, your elbow stays, the angle in your elbow will stay largely the same, and you're just throwing the elbow upwards, Whereas in a straight, obviously your elbow extends as your fist gets away from your body. And he was throwing like an underhanded straight with his right hand. So it was like an uppercut. It was coming from below Hubbard's guard, but it was going forwards and hitting him like straight from underneath. Really liked it. He really hurt Hubbard with that at a couple of points. Think about how Harry used to throw his uppercuts like that. Freddie Roach teaches uppercuts on the bag like that. Like you put your hand forward. Because you like, obviously, if someone's leaning forward, you can throw your uppercut literally up. Whereas if someone's standing quite upright, it's a lot harder to hit anything on the way up because they're basically flat. If you look at them from below, they're basically flat upwards. So you have to throw it forwards and go into the opponent. Think of like Pacquiao's up jab or something like that. Something that goes towards the opponent underhanded rather than up. Hubbard's takedowns were surprisingly good against a guy who had been against like Gillespie and they were talking about how well he did against Gillespie, but I feel like Gillespie manhandled him when I just thinking back on that fight. But Hubbard's takedowns looked pretty decent. Could get cut now. I mean, he's on a probably, what is it like? Oh no, he's won his last one. Who knows? He could probably be doing very well in like Bellator or somewhere like that. He's still only 29. There's a lot of time to be working in, especially when he's just fought Vince Pichel, who's 38 and suddenly looks better than ever. But that's the nature of the UFC lightweight division. Guys come and go and then come back again because it's one of the most competitive divisions in the world. Probably the most competitive division in the world, except like maybe featherweight, bantamweight. They're getting pretty good now, or have been for a while. What else did I enjoy? Oh, Brian Kelleher. Absolute boy. My friend on Twitter, but also a boy. I can't remember when I last saw him because he was working non-stop through 2020, but he fought Domingo Pilarte and just again manhandled him. He was. It's like when Frankie Edgar fought Yair Rodriguez or Jeremy Stevens. The guys who just have that sense of when you're going to come back, when they have that ability to go at you, throw a couple of punches, and do just enough that you think you're in a boxing match or, a kickboxing match, and you throw back and then they're in on your hips. It's that perfect anticipation. And he had it in every round of this fight. Like he'd throw enough punches that Pilarte would throw back, legitimately trying to hit him, and he'd get in on his hips and take him down. And from close guard, he was turning over good elbows, driving his way to half guard. It makes an interesting comparison, actually, with Logan Storley's fight from Bellator this weekend. Actually, Logan Storley and Ramiz Brahimaj from the very first fight of the night on the UFC card. Brahimaj did what Storley was trying to do. He was grinding through half guard, passing, and effectively got the back and took the choke. Storley was just trying to pass, and the guy they put him against was supposed to be a bit of a walkover because it's your number 5 ranked guy in Storley against a guy who isn't ranked and is on like a 2-fight winning streak, but was finished twice before that. And it turned out he had pretty fucking good guard retention. He had a really nice butterfly guard. Couldn't sweep Storley because obviously, like, a good wrestler, when they're sprawling their hips out on top of you, weighs hundreds of pounds, it feels like. So he couldn't sweep Storley, but he could keep getting his feet back in front of him. And Storley just continued to try and pass, and he didn't throw a single strike or attempt a submission, which is obviously a lot trickier because you're busy trying to pass guard. But he didn't throw a single strike in that fight. And he won on the scorecards, but one judge gave it to the other guy, and I supported that guy. Because the other guy, when he got up, he threw some fucking strikes, and he attempted like a couple of chokes from the bottom. Like, like bullshit ninja chokes and things like that. But it was Storley's choice to sit on top of this guy and not throw a single strike. And we're supposed to not be scoring like top control without any effective offense. All Storley did was, once he got the guy down, lay on him. I mean, he was trying to pass, he just wasn't good enough. But that's like, so many wrestlers don't bother passing, because if you get to half guard, you could sit on the leg and throw some strikes. Now, granted, if he'd postured up to throw some strikes and the guy was using like a butterfly half guard, maybe the guy would have scrambled up. But he already showed that he could just get him down whenever he wanted to. Throw some fucking strikes. Kelleher had a lot more success because the guy just sort of stayed in close guard on his back, getting beaten up. Got to half guard and passed a little bit a couple of times. I thought his passing was actually looking really sharp in this one. There was a really nice moment where he stood in the guy's guard out in the open, and the guy grabbed his ankle and started trying to move to a De La Riva or a reverse De La Riva, holding the ankle and controlling with the legs against a standing opponent. And Kelleher immediately pulled his leg out and just threw his legs by and punched him in the face. And that's really good. That's really good grappling. You just can't let the guy have any sort of anchor point on you. But then as the commentators pointed out, like you saw the difference because Kelleher ended up on the bottom at one point and he just immediately cross-framed on the other shoulder, opened his legs, slid a knee in front, started standing up. And he didn't mind giving up the underhook. He just held the overhook and worked his way up. And then the guy dropped down on a single and he actually went into the Ricardo Lamas series, which I put out a Filthy Casuals guide on. I think I've taken it down now. Maybe I'll put it up again. Maybe I'll edit him in and put it up again. But the get the fuck up guard, as I called it, Craig Jones liked that. He called it the reverse knee shield, I think. He's been teaching it lately. But he's supposed to have a DVD coming on it, and I haven't seen it yet. Think of the knee shield half guard, do it on the other leg. It's like the wrong side. But basically, it's like you've got one butterfly hook in and a grip over their back, and you're picking them up, trying to sweep them. And as they put their hands out to base, they go into like a headstand, and you grab the guillotine. And he did it. It was great. He didn't get the guillotine, unfortunately. But yeah, dominating performance, all class. Lovely, nice hug at the start of the third round, and then they went back to try and take each other's heads off. Offered him a hand up at the end of the second round. Just, yeah, consummately impressive. Good work, Brian Kelleher. Josiane Nunes versus Bia Malecki was good fun. I mean, how the fuck are these people the same weight class? Like, Bia Malecki looked legitimately a weight class and a half bigger than her. Towering woman. And Nunes is that sort of Brazilian lady who just runs in swinging. It worked for Andrade. It worked for Priscilla Cachoeira, despite not having a lot of power. And it's worked for Nunes. And she did really good work. She even used the Valentina Shevchenko get out of jail card, which is Superman punch. You just try and come in through the top of the opponent's guard. If you watch Nunes versus Shevchenko 2, once Nunes starts backing her onto the fence, Shevchenko's only effective offense is to jump high, throw the Superman punch, not land, but then run up into a low kick as Nunes retreats. And that's a funny one because I did a legitimate analysis just then, but I also made fun of Valentina Shevchenko. It wasn't my usual bit. Actually, Ariel stole my bit this week by claiming that you can't deny Kayla Harrison is one of the top 10 pound-for-pound women in the world. To which I'd say, no, all of them are strawweights. But yeah, Nunes versus Malecki, good fun. Nunes just walked her down and smashed her against the fence. Really, actually, this one has interesting parallels to Czech Congo versus Sergei Haritonov. Another seamless segue there. The timestamps on this one are going to be all over the fucking place. But Czech Congo was trying to do his circling along the fence. And if you watch his fight with Minakov a couple of years ago, like Minakov, it was a rematch, but their second fight with Minakov has no idea how to deal with that. And he doesn't have a jab. So he keeps throwing right-hand leads at Czech Congo, who's just circling away. And it's like the worst performance I've ever seen from Minakov. It was just a massive hole exposed in him. And Czech Congo tried to do it the same here. He was like Israel Adesanya on 0.25 speed. But he's trying to do it against Sergei Haritonov. And Sergei Haritonov's just walking in, plodding in behind this jab. And every jab he lands is like shaking Congo to his feet. But Congo made the difference when he worked out that by part of Sergei Haritonov cutting the ring on him and applying pressure was that he had to use his presence. He was offering a big target. It's just that a lot of the time Congo was trying to hit him in the head and he was trading the jab for trying to swing at his head and getting hurt. But instead, like once he started kneeing at Haritonov's body as he stepped in, he really he'd back Sergei Haritonov up immediately. Every time Haritonov got kneed in the body, he suddenly went, oh, fuck this, and backed off. And then he'd eventually get back to the game plan of trying to walk him down. So actually really good mid-fight adaptation from Czech Congo. I was very surprised. And he's like 46 years old. So Czech Congo about to reach his potential. Anyway, Nunes smoked Malecki. That was fun. She could probably use some fucking body shots. It's like, Jessica Andrade's career went from win-loss to win-win-loss once she added body shots. Ignacio Bahaman, there we go. This guy really impressed me. We talked about Brahimaj versus Palatnikov, so fuck that. Last fight we're talking about today, Bahamondes versus Roosevelt Roberts. Loved this. Roberts came out jabbing. He jabbed, pulled, left hooked as Bahamondes came back with a counter. Lovely stuff. Then he threw a 1-2 and ducked and immediately got in on a clinch because Bahamondes threw a left hook back. These are the ones that's just like you could go out into the first minute of sparring, do those two things, and 80% of the time that's going to work really well because if you throw the jab, the guy's going to come back. If you throw the 1-2, the guy's going to come back. And you've used that. The first one you jabbed and retreated and scored a counter, breaking free. The second one you jabbed and threw the right hand and you ducked in. So you've protected yourself from counter punches. You've put yourself either away from the opponent or in a clinch. Lovely stuff. And then it all went tits up. No, Bahamondes basically decided, oh man, this guy's got much better boxing than me. I better throw twice as many punches. And it worked. Like he was just throwing 1-2-1, 2-1-2. Just basically like he looked like a kickboxer or karateka, probably like a karateka sort of guy. They don't have hooks or very good hooks. So they just throw lots of straight punches. But yeah, he threw loads of those. He was timing the right hand across the top of the jab really nicely. Throwing lots of kicks. Attempting the odd takedown. Really doing well at recognizing that once he backed Roberts up, and he wasn't just like chasing Roberts out from the jab. If he chased Roberts back from the jab, he'd get check hooked. But by moving Roberts to the fence and actually applying pressure effectively, he made Roberts choose left or right. Roberts couldn't just drop away. So then Roberts would circle out past his lead leg and Bahamondes would spin into a back fist or an elbow or a kick. And yeah, wouldn't you know it? He hurt him with some nice body shots first, but then late in the third, caught him with a wheel kick coming around. Man, was there 5 seconds to go? Fucking hell, that's unfortunate. But yeah, beautiful wheel kick, scores the knockout. I was really impressed. Bahamondes is on my list. Has he fought in the UFC before? I might have seen him before, but I am now going to go and fight past him. Anything else we need to talk about? Marcelo Golm made his Bellator debut and knocked out someone called Swanson, who was like Cub Swanson's fat uncle. But yeah, it was all right. And then the one that I did like from Bellator was Lugo versus Lee. And I'm watching this fight, and Lugo is throwing these or not throwing, I keep saying throwing feints. Showing feints is probably the correct term. But, I'm not going to... that's my Thai plum. I'm not going to get too anal about it. But Lugo's showing this big shoulder feint. He's stepping forward with his left leg, pumping his left shoulder at the guy, and not throwing the jab. And just as I'm thinking, this dude is really obvious with his feints, because he never throws a real... Oh, and then he jabbed the guy and put him on his ass. But the ending of this one was surreal. He got the back, he got the choke, and the guy was just holding out for the last few seconds, and the round ended, he released the choke immediately, and the guy's head very briefly bounced on the mat, and then he sat up, and the guy who was choking him goes, he was out. And then he assumes that fuck, haven't got away with it. So Lugo starts walking back to his corner. The other guy stands up and starts walking back to his corner and stumbles half the way. He has to try and walk off the fact that he's just getting up from being unconscious. And the ref stepped in and called it. And some people were mad about that, but I think that's good. He was clearly unconscious, however briefly, which is an end to the fight. But had this guy been reffing Carlos Newton versus Matt Hughes 1, the world would be a very different place. Well, no, it wouldn't, because Carlos Newton lost the rematch pretty handily. But that was, if you don't remember that one, go look it up on Fight Pass. But Carlos Newton triangled Matt Hughes. Matt Hughes picked him up and they were against the cage. So he was standing leaning Carlos Newton on the cage. And he went unconscious and powerbombed him. And the back of Carlos Newton's head hit the mat, so he went unconscious. And the ref went, Carlos Newton's out, TKO. And Matt Hughes got up what happened? And then had to be told, celebrate, Matt, you won. So yeah, if you're going to watch anything from Bellator, I'd say actually the main event, Czech Congo versus Sergey Kharitonov, honestly, pretty good. Between Congo's stance switching and the use of the teep to the body and the jabs and the knees. And Sergey Haritonov's doing good work early, actually. And then Lugo versus, what was his name? But anyway, I'm approaching the hour, so this will probably come down to 45 minutes-ish. But let's call it there for today. If you want to get in on the Boycast on Thursday or read all the interesting shit I do, the Aldo one's going up soon, the Advanced Striking Aldo, or the Advanced Striking Igor Vovchanchin from last week. If you want to get in on that, read those, listen to that shit, support the podcast, become a Patreon boy. If you want to send an email to the podcast, jackslackpodcast@gmail.com. And if you put from a Patreon boy, I'll answer it on the Patreon episode so that non-Patreon boys don't miss out on answers to their questions by me putting them on the Boycast. And if you want to see what I'm writing at any time, fightprimer.com. I am your boy, Jack Slack, a generation of Brazilian women who were raised on Vanderlei Silva fights. Bless.